Good morning. We are back on 8/1/21, reading about 10 minutes a day from the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. And today we're still in the essay titled, it's a big one. I got to go back pretty far. Titled, The Market for Liberty by Morris and Linda Tannehill from 1970. And we're reading starting at the bottom of page 296. So let's get to it. Here we go. Insurance companies, a very important sector of any totally free economy, would have a special incentive to dissociate themselves from any aggressor and, in addition, to bring all their considerable business influence to bear against him. Aggressive violence causes value loss, and the insurance industry would suffer the major cost in most such value losses. An unrestrained aggressor is a walking liability, and no insurance company, however remotely removed from his original aggression, would wish to sustain the risk that he might aggress against one of its own clients next. Besides, aggressors and those who associate with them are more likely to be involved in situations of violence and are, thus, bad insurance risks. An insurance company would probably refuse coverage to such people out of a foresighted desire to minimize any future losses which their aggressions might cause. But even if the company were not motivated by such foresight, it would still be forced to rate their premiums up drastically or cancel their coverage altogether in order to avoid carrying the extra risk involved in their inclination to violence. In a competitive economy, no insurance company could afford to continue covering aggressors and those who had dealings with aggressors and simply pass the cost on to its honest customers. It would soon lose these customers to more reputable firms which could afford to charge less for their insurance coverage. What would loss of insurance coverage mean in a free economy? Even if the old reliable defense company or any other business or individual could generate enough force to protect itself against any aggressive or retaliatory force brought against it by any factor or combination of factors, it would still have to go completely without several economic necessities. It could not purchase insurance protection against auto accidents, natural disasters, or contractual disputes. It would have no protection against damage suits resulting from accidents occurring on its property. It is very possible that Old Reliable would even have to do without the services of a fire extinguishing company, since such companies are natural outgrowths of the fire insurance business. In addition to the terrific penalties imposed by the business ostracism which would naturally follow its aggressive act, Old Reliable would have trouble with its employees. Government employees are legally protected from suffering any personal consequences as a result of all but the most blatant of the aggressive acts which they perpetrate in the line of duty. Such functionaries as police officials, judges, and internal revenue and narcotics agents can initiate force with immunity simply by taking protection under such cliches as, "I don't write the law, I just enforce it," or "That's a matter for a jury to decide," or "This statute was passed by the duly elected representatives of the people." But employees of a free market defense company would have no such legal immunity from retaliatory force. They would have to assume responsibility for their own actions. If a defense service agent carried out an order which involved the intentional initiation of force, both the agent and the entrepreneur or manager who gave him the order, as well as any other employees knowledgeably involved, would be liable for any damages caused, since he could not take refuge in the system. No honest defense service employee would carry out an order which involved the initiation of force, nor would an honest employer give such an order or sanction such action on the part of his employee. Thus, if Old Reliable managed to keep any employees at all, or to hire any new ones to replace those who had left, it would have to settle for people who were either terribly stupid or desperate enough to believe they had nothing to lose by being associated with aggression. In other words, simpletons and hoodlums. In a laissez-faire society, a defense company which committed aggression, unless it acted speedily to rectify the injustices, would be left with no customers, associates, or employees except for undesirables. This raises the question of whether the criminal element in a laissez-faire society would, or even could, support their own, quote, mafia defense company for the purpose of defending them against the retaliatory force of their victims. Only a man who was willing to be openly identified as an aggressor would buy the services of such a mafia defense agency, since the nature of the activities and clients of such a defense agency could not be kept hidden. This open aggressor would have to support himself entirely by aggression, because no honest man would take the chance of having business dealings with him. Furthermore, he would have to be existing very well financially, since the cost of protecting a man continually involved in acts of violence would be extremely high. It is reasonable to conclude, therefore, that the only clients of such a mafia defense company would be highly successful, big-time open aggressors. Since an aggressor could hardly hope to obtain that much money all by himself, the existence of such men presupposes the existence of a fairly extensive, well-organized networks of lesser hoodlums working for the big operators. In other words, organized criminal gangs would be required to provide sufficient support for a mafia defense company. Although such an organized criminal gang may enter into many fields, organized crime finds its basic support in black market activities. A black market is any area of the market which is legally prohibited. If left unprohibited, it would be an area of trade involving peaceful, willing exchanges between sellers and buyers. But when government initiates force by forbidding this area of trade to honest men, it throws it open to men who are willing to take the risk of violating bureaucratic dictates and the statutory laws of politicians. The violence and fraud associated with any black market do not spring from the nature of the good or service being sold. They are a direct result of the fact that entrepreneurs have been legally forbidden to deal in this area of the market, leaving it open to men who dare to ignore prohibitions and who are willing to resort to violence in order to do business without getting caught. Unless prohibited, every market activity is operated on the basis of willing exchange, without the initiation of force, because this is the only... Unless prohibited, every market activity is operated on the basis of willing exchange, without the initiation of force, because this is the only way a business can be operated successfully, as force is a non-productive expenditure of energy. An excellent example of a black market occurred during the Prohibition era of the 1920s, when government prohibited the manufacture and sale of liquor. An area of the market was arbitrarily closed to anyone who wished to remain law-abiding. Since there was still a market demand for liquor, hosts of criminals were attracted and created to fill a vacuum. Numerous gangs, including the mafia, were founded and or grew into organizations of immense power on the basis of the black market afforded by the Prohibition Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Many of these organized criminal gangs are still with us. Although they lost a great deal of their base with the repeal of Prohibition, they were able to survive by shifting the major part of their activities to other governmentally forbidden areas, such as gambling and prostitution. It is interesting to note that the two organizations which fought hardest against the repeal of Prohibition were the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Mafia. There is a compelling reason why organized crime must base its support in black market activities. Wealth does not exist in nature, but must be created. The only means of creating wealth is value production and free exchange, the manufacture and trade of some desired good or service. One may obtain wealth directly by productive work, or one may obtain it indirectly by looting it from a producer. But the wealth must be created by production in the first place in order to exist at all. The looter is a parasite who will not create his own wealth and its consequent power, but is dependent on some producer to furnish it. This means that looting cannot be a profitable business in the long run, to the extent that producers are not disarmed by a false ideology such as pacifism, or by being legally prohibited from acting in their own defense. Producers are the ones who hold the source of wealth and power, and in any long-range contest between looters and non-armed producers, the weight of wealth and power must be on the side of the producers. This is the reason that an organized hoodlum gang cannot support its large size and relatively complex structure by acts of aggression alone. The risk inevitably outweighs the profit, and this would be particularly true in a society where value protection was a service sold in a competitive free market. Such a gang can only support itself by obtaining its wealth directly, through production and trade in some black market. Thus, organized crime depends for its existence on black markets, which are the result of government prohibitions. Without government-caused black markets, criminals would have to operate singly or in small groups because they would have no area of production and trade to furnish support for large and complex organizations. So it is clear that the criminal element in a laissez-faire society couldn't possibly support a mafia defense company. And we'll stop right there. Toward the bottom of page 260, reading about 10 minutes a day from the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. And we'll see you back.